Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today on St. Patrick's Day and spending your time in your afternoon learning a little bit more about the Chinese Communist Party infiltration operations throughout the world and how that rolls up into PEI. But first I'm going to ask David Weale, who's an islander that's well known to many of you, to speak a few words, and then we'll come up after that and start the ball rolling. So thank you for being here today. We are opening up this wall here so that you'll be able to come into that side. They will try to put some more chairs. Thank you for your overwhelming support here today, and we hope that you will get a great deal out of today's event. So thank you.
Well, well, well. Look at you. Look at you. You are a beautiful sight to see, I'll tell you, because what I'm seeing here, concerned islanders caring about their place, and I see in this building right now a commitment to change. So I welcome you all, each and every one. Thank you for coming. We're going to have a great afternoon. 12 years ago, I had a friend called George, lived in Little Sands. And one day, he drove me around. And he showed me the land that was being sold. And I'll never forget his words. He said to me, "David, I think there is more going on here than you and I know about." And that stuck in my mind like an anchor in the wet sand. There's more going on here than you and I know about. And that's what this gathering is all about. This gathering is all about understanding better what is happening. Because there's an awful lot of confusion. There's an awful lot of ignorance. And so this meeting is committed to knowing more, understanding better, and reacting out of that knowledge. But you know, I mean, I've been trying to find out what was going on for a long time. But sometimes when you get too close to a thing, you can't see how big it is. And that's why these guys are here. Because these guys are going to help us see the bigger context of what's happening on Prince Edward Island. They're going to help us to understand what's going on at that level. And I'm so glad that they're here. There are very few people in the country, really, with the informed experience of these gents on the stage. I'm so pleased that they've come to share their knowledge with us. To tell us how big it is. To tell us how it works, or to quote George, to help us understand what is going on that we don't know about. So with that, I'm very pleased to turn the podium over to Dean Baxendale, publisher of Optimum Publishing International, who will be your Master of Ceremonies. Oh my God, look at it. Look at it. Thanks for coming.
David. David speaks for a lot of islanders, and I've had the pleasure to meet him over the last few months and hear his passion. So first of all, bonjour, bienvenue. You know, I want to express my gratitude to all of you for coming here on St. Patrick's Day. I don't know how sacred that day here might be on the island. Today, we're honored to have Garry Clement, author of Undercover, Inside the Shady World of Organized Crime and the RCMP. We're also privileged to welcome Michel Juneau-Katsuya, the former chief of Asia Pacific for the Canadian Security Intelligence Agency. His story and extensive contribution to the Mosaic effect, how the Chinese Communist Party started a hybrid war in America's backyard, will be on full display today. I'm also pleased to welcome my friend and colleague, former Minister of Education of New Brunswick, Dominic Carty. He'll share, you can clap for him. He'll share his own experience regarding elite capture, as well as tackling the Confucius Institutes in his own province of New Brunswick. Today, we'll offer some new insights and perspectives on the operations of the Chinese Communist Party, also known as the CCP, and will be referred to fondly in that same breath, and their hybrid warfare globally, how these operations roll up into PEI. We're all here today only because a concerned islander called me up. He was reading the Mosaic effect. That sparked a 5-month-long journalistic investigation. And he highlighted in chapter 11, where the book chronicles the activities of Frank Zhao, a third-generation Red Princeling, with his ties to the United Front Works Department. They include also his business venture with Duncan McIntosh and the former premier of PEI, Wade McLaughlin, also known as Anne in China, Inc. The intricacies of these engagements underscore the PEI's significance to the global strategy of the Chinese Communist Party. To fully understand how the hybrid war plays out in everyday life, I encourage you to buy all of our books that we have on sale here today. This project has taken us across Prince Edward Island, all the way to British Columbia, and from Washington to Munich. We've engaged over 24 individuals nationwide with direct knowledge, but our investigation has extended to religious, human rights, and national security experts from around the globe. The wealth of information, insights, and documents we've gathered is poised to culminate in a forthcoming book. It's become evident through our research that PEI's situation is far from unique, with the CCP's influence reaching islands worldwide, and I've had a direct experience in some of those island infiltration operations, through various means, including financial inducements. Its working title is, and you can be proud of it, Canada Under Siege, How Anne of Green Gables Became the CCP's Magic Weapon. That's a working title. We may modify that over time. Anyway, today's panel you will experience their in intelligence, law enforcement, national and transnational organized crime, and politics as they explore the multifaceted aspects of hybrid warfare. We'll address the CCP's influence operations, elite capture, espionage across industrial, military, and academic sectors, transnational repression, election interference, and organized crime's role in financing and facilitating operations inside Canada. These are the experts. The panel will explain some of these concepts and will not reduce, should not be reduced to conspiracy theories. The speakers on this stage are professional investigators and have over 90 years of job experience. But remember, this is your island, It's only when concerned citizens collaborate to get involved and form a united front that politicians and business leaders are held to account. Something to date that has not happened on your island for some time. Before we proceed, I'd like to remind everyone of a couple ground rules for today's event. Firstly, I encourage you to support our work by purchasing our books, which will help continue our investigation. We will have an audience Q&A, and we have Joe McDonald here from the island, fellow islander, who will facilitate by asking a couple of questions first, but then we'll have an open mic for 4 or 5 questions. I know you have a lot, and I want to also let you know that we have question cards. If you want to ask a question, and it's not going to get answered today, I promise you we will take all the questions. We will answer those questions. We'll put it on a website so that everyone's question can be answered. Now, there'll be very many similar questions, but we'll try to answer them. If you want your name published, happy to do that. If you want to be anonymous, keep your name off the card. So, in closing, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to our sponsor, I Am for Democracy, Alan McPhee. I will share his thoughts after our panel discussion. Following that, I'll have some closing remarks to conclude the book launch. And Garry and Michel will be pleased to dedicate a book to you today. If we run out, we'll take orders and ship them to you next week. Thank you once again for being here today, and let's roll a video right now that will give you a sense that comes from the Mosaic effect and when we broke Operation Dragon Lord in Washington, D.C. with the CBC. And just to let you know, I've broken international stories from Delhi to London to Washington and through Ottawa and other democratic nations around the world, all on the subject of CCP infiltration operations, their genocide against the Uyghurs, their human rights violations against Tibetans, their genocide against Tibetan Buddhists. And so this is really about opening your eyes to the world. So before Michel comes up, let's roll the video.
Useful to the government in power, or the people who wanted to get in power or stay in power, and they saw useful to simply keep a certain statu quo. The other element is definitely we have evidence that we have been infiltrated by agent of influence, people working on behalf of the Chinese intelligence service, not necessarily spy, but people who have been recruited and being capable to influence the power at bay. So this has been going on for the last 40 years, from Mr. Mulroney all the way to Mr. Trudeau today. Every prime minister has been compromised at one point or another by those agents of influence.
Every prime minister, you say, has been compromised by those agents?
Every prime minister. Every government, every office was compromised, and when we brought the warning, nobody listened.
That is quite the assertion to make, sir. How much do you think, considering that, is this a security risk for Canadians?
It is a phenomenal security risk because basically you can ask yourself the question, who's really running the country? Is it a foreign entity or is it our government? And this is the problem that we are currently facing, is that we have been neglected, and at the end of the day, we might need an independent body to investigate properly what is going on currently. Not a question of finding the culprit in the past, but definitely trying to take the measures today in order to protect ourselves for the futures. And we need to sort of inspire ourselves from some action that were taken, like, for example, in 2017 in Australia, they vote for a law against foreign interference. We need that kind of tools to be capable to enforce some kind of protection, and as the whistleblower was saying, some form of accountability as well.
And I just want to circle back to what you just said, because that was quite the allegation. I just would like you perhaps to go into detail on how you would know that every, as you said, Prime Minister has been affected by this. Can you give us some evidence behind that assertion?
I cannot do.
There we go. You want some evidence? Good afternoon, everybody. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I hope my sexy French accent will not sort of make it difficult for you to understand. But I think what we need to do before we get to the specific of the island is to understand the big pictures. Thank you very much for showing this clip, which was given over a year ago to CBC, and it was a spur of the moment interview requested when we discovered about the issue of foreign interference. I've been in the game for over 40 years. I've been investigating, particularly and specializing on the Chinese, on Asia, and my job has not been politically motivated. And I like this because earlier when we were getting prepared for the event, there's a gentleman that came to me and said, are you politically motivated? Yeah, I am politically motivated. Everybody is politically motivated. You are all politically motivated to be here today, and I applaud. I can only sort of congratulate you, because everybody here has a sense that there is an urgency and we need to do something about it. Basically, back in the 90s, when I was the chief of Asia Pacific, we discovered that the Chinese government, and I want to be very, very precise. Today, we'll use very often the short version by saying the Chinese, but we're talking about the Chinese government. We're not talking about the Chinese people. Chinese people are just like you, victims of their government, victim of the hypocrisy, the corruptions, and the laissez-faire that has been taking place for a long period of time. But in the case of the Chinese people from China mainland, they have a dictatorship over there, and they have to sort of suffer that, just like some of us have been suffering the wrong ruling of these provincial governments. Because I will come back to the historical discovery that we've made here. I'm not from the island. I don't have the honor or the privilege to be an islander, so I don't have any politically motivated element here to sort of run for office or anything like this. I don't have axe to grind with current or past political organization. I've been a federal government employee all my life, and I've been defending this country all my life. My body carries scar of my commitment, and that's okay. That's what I signed up for. So back in the 90s, I was the chief of Asia Pacific, and we discovered already in the 90s that the Chinese embassy in Ottawa had given money to both federal party, the Liberals and the Conservative. Already they were trying to sort of influence this way. They were clumsy at that period of time. So we went to our counterpart in the US and we asked the same question, are you watching and seeing the same thing? And they acknowledged that they were also starting to see exactly the same thing happening in the US. But at the same time, they got concerned that maybe the Canadian government would not do the right things to defend itself. So they started a research of their own, an operation of their own called Dragon Lord. And they came to the conclusion that, unfortunately, the Canadian government would not necessarily do the right things due to its leaders who were already compromised. And as I mentioned on national TV, and I repeat in front of you, since Mr. Mulroney, every single prime minister of this country have been compromised, have been told that the Chinese foreign interference was taking place, but they either ignored, used it for personal gain or for political advantage. Unfortunately, with time, we've seen exactly the same thing taking place in pretty much every provinces, and PEI is at the top of it. PEI has been compromised a long, long time ago by agent of Beijing who has been capable to manipulate the politician, and the one who sort of drank the Kool-Aid benefited in millions of dollars. Millions of dollars have got lost here in this province. Now, we investigated that. We have evidence. We know what took place and everything. And on due time, it will be presented to the right authorities. But as my colleague and I were chatting together yesterday, and we were saying, if we were still in office with the rank that we had, we would have launched national investigation or federal investigation in PEI about what has been going on for a long period of time. Unfortunately, that is the sad news. The good news, you know, the Chinese symbol for crisis is the same symbol that we use for opportunity as well. So you have an opportunity. You have an opportunity to maybe correct this situation and to fix this situation. But this is not a conspiracy. This is not politically motivated because we want to run for office and everything. We were called here, outsiders, to sort of look at the situation and to see if we could help. And that's exactly what we intend to do as much as possible. And to that effect, we have already gave warning to the federal authorities. They are currently studying what's going on here, and we hope to be capable to sort of come out with greater news. But as it was mentioned, your help will be necessary. You want change, you need to activate that change. You need to sort of take action. You need abundantly to request accountability. And what we've discovered in our investigation is that for a long period of time here, all the previous government that you had in this province have intentionally avoided to pass regulations, policies, or even law that they could be made accountable with. So it's a very Kafkaian environment. If there's no regulation, no policy, no law, I didn't break the law, I didn't break the regulations, and it all returned to the cabinet to make the ultimate decision. And then I favor my friends. I favor the people who are sort of greasing my wheels in my hands and stuff like that. And that's unacceptable. Because currently worldwide democracy is under siege. You know, there's 196 countries around the world. And only 13% of those countries are now a democracy. We're losing ground. We're losing ground, and we need to be capable to do much better with this. And PEI, well, it was small enough to be easily corrupted. It's small enough to be easily fixed. And that's the opportunity. Definitely. So we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more. I want to give a chance to my colleagues to sort of say their bits and pieces, and I'm looking forward to the questions. And like I said, like Dean said, no question will not be answered. But thank you very, very much for the people that we met during the course of our investigation. We've been doing this for the last 5 months. We met a lot of people. We have a lot of good information that will be helping to understand exactly historically what took place, what is happening, and what we can do to prevent for rotting more in this situation. Thanks again for coming today.
Good afternoon. First of all, congratulations. This is the only way that I think changes can be made. It's got to come from you, the people. And what I've seen, I've been fighting, as you'll see, anybody that picks up my book, Truth to Power, I think I've bapped my head against the wall for a better part of 55, 60 years, trying to get people to realize that just because somebody is a premier or a prime minister or a minister doesn't give them the God-given right to abuse us. And it's time we made them stand up. Robert Kennedy made a statement, I use it often, and I think it's one, and it's because I have children, I have grandchildren. My hair might not show it, but I can tell you my knees do. And he said, every generation inherits a world it never made, and as it does so, it automatically becomes the trustee of that world for those that come after. In due course, each generation makes its own accounting to its children. And if you think about that, that's why we're here. Starting off, shame on the politicians. Shame on them. I have so many stones I've seen in my time. I spent a number of years in Ottawa. I worked in organized and transnational crime and financial crime. And is there any lawyers in the room? But I'm going to pick on you as well. Shame on you. Shame on lawyers that fight the fact that you do not want to be part and parcel of the Proceeds of Crime and Money Laundering Act and reporting. I hold a solicitor-client privilege dear to my heart, but you do not have a right to be a real estate agent and a financial advisor and keep that secret. And wake up. Either be part of the problem or the solution. If we look at where we're at today, and I look at the island, you've got fentanyl coming into your island. That is disruptive technology or disruptive war created by China. All of those drugs, precursors, are coming out of China. If anybody studies history, and I know we got some historians in the room, go back to the opium wars that Britain created on China, and this is now reverse. And we are too naive to realize it. We have got fentanyl pouring into this country. We have addicts all over. We are losing a generation, and our way of dealing with it by incompetent leaders is to give out free drugs. I can tell you, working undercover and working with addicts, they are not in control to make a decision. We owe them a right to get them the help in a closed, controlled environment. Now, dealing with your situation, you can go to every province in this country, and I do have to state this. Any of my comments are mine. They have nothing to do with the bank I work with, in fact, but I will say my president is probably the most supportive president of any bank in this country. In fact, I got him to make a declaration to the board that we put compliance on the same level as profit. We're the only bank in the country that's ever done it. So that's what we need. And looking at your situation, I've met with some what I would classify extremely courageous people in this province. You know, they put themselves at risk. They've tried to get politicians to wake up. You know, it's sad. It's really sad. And it's not just here in PEI. I've witnessed this for far, far too long. I've tried to get investigations going on politicians. I tried to get, when organized crime was waltzing into our Parliament Hill, I tried to get that stopped and had an order that I couldn't interfere. Those are the type of things that we have to start standing up to our rights. This is not the Canada that our First World War veterans and our Second World War fought for. They would turn over in their graves. I believe most people want a Canada, want their island to be prosper and be prosperous for the next generation and the generation that comes after. If we don't nip in the bud what I'm seeing right now, I hate to say it, but this will become known someday, somewhere down the road, as China Island. And that's the risk that we face today. How do you stop it? Well, we stop it because, first of all, every one of you have a voice and every one of you are voters. Stop letting the politicians ruin your province. You have rules and regulations, and we've got to get them back. And we got to get people to understand we need to control this. We can't allow organizations come in claiming to be not-for-profit. And I mean, anybody that looks at what they're buying and that, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what's going on here. Money laundering, I've looked at for many, many years at many, many different levels of organizations. And I can tell you, looking at money laundering, this is money laundering. The Chinese are absolute masters at money laundering. I've seen it. I was stationed in Asia, so I witnessed it there. I have the scars to prove I was stationed in Asia because myself and along with Michel and a very good friend of mine that died last year, we uncovered a terrible fraud going on, again dealing with immigration. We reported it and it got buried. However, I never remained silent, and I don't intend to. I'll probably go to my grave still yelling, but I plan on doing it. We've got to do a better job in this country, and I think what I'm seeing here today gives me hope that we can do it. You are not, we are not, I'm not racist. I have some very good Asian friends. It's not about racism. It's not about centering out anybody. This is about organized transnational crime disrupting your province, and it's going to get worse. This idea of them building a port, do whatever you can to stop it. Surrey-Fraser Docks, I tried to get it stopped when I was over in Hong Kong, and Surrey-Fraser Docks was funded by the Asians, by China. Just think about what they can do. They have full access to our country. Where the hell do you think the fentanyl's coming from? We are now a transshipment point, and I wrote a report in 1995 that Canada would become a transshipment point for narcotics coming out of Asia. We are a transshipment point by the year 2000. And we now supply United States. We now supply fentanyl. So when I talk about this, we're talking about Asian-based organized crime that's infiltrated our countries. The depth that they're here, I can't tell you, but I know they're here. You got fentanyl, they're here. And for some of you, you'll say, well, who's Asian-based organized crime? If I said Hell's Angels, how many have heard of Hell's Angels? Well, take Hell's Angels, multiply them by 50, and now you've got triads. This is what we're confronting. But we're smarter than them if we put our collective minds together. The one thing I will say, by the people that came forward, and I got a chance to look at documentation, I have never seen documentation that really, if I sat down with some of the people that wrote these documents, the only thing I would say starting out the interview would be, how do you plead, guilty or very guilty? Because it is blatant as hell. And I think anybody in this room that knows anything about finance, and I suspect a lot of you do because you work in it every day, you would agree with me. And I thank God politicians aren't smart, because that one, they definitely left a paper trail. So all I can commit to, I can't promise anything. I'm retired, long retired law enforcement officer, but I do this because I believe it's the right thing to do for future generations. And all I can commit, along with my colleagues, we will push this to the degree we can. I have reached out to the commissioner who I happen to know, and I fight on a lot of fronts right now. We need to change the RCMP. It cannot be all things to all people. We need an organization now that can deal with the complexities of national, international organized crime. Because it's embarrassing to be lecturing abroad, as I do oftentimes, and we are now considered an embarrassment as a country because we do not have the capacity anymore. And I can tell you, when I was enforcing, when I ran the financial crime program, we were sought after to speak around the world because they felt we had the best program going. I want to see that happen again, and I think we have the ability to do it. So anyways, thank you very much for coming out. I thank you for your commitment, and I ask you to get behind the group here that's pushing this, because if everybody got behind it, I can guarantee you'll make some substantial changes. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I promise that not all politicians are quite as described. Because in the end, the ability for us to choose our politicians is the reason why we can beat countries like communist China. The reason why we can stand up against authoritarian pseudo-dictatorships like Mr. Putin's crew in Russia. The reason why we have a standard of living, a level of technological advancement, and a level of prosperity that is unequaled in the history of the world, and we should not be giving away that gift without price to those who abuse it, who take our money and our investments, who take our innovation and our ideas, who steal our products and our intellectual property. and who then ship it back to us in the form of fentanyl, in the form of substandard goods flooding our stores. That is the situation that we have walked into over the last 30 years. And we've walked into it for some good reasons. Canada is rightly proud of being a country that's open, built on immigrants. I'm an immigrant myself. But we fell into the trap of thinking that the only people in the world who could be racist, the only people in the world who could be discriminatory, were from people from the Western countries where those ideas of racism and discrimination were developed. And we rightly stood against them. But we've stood against them now to the point that we stand and look at each other in a circle and not recognizing that there are dangerous, and I would argue in the case of China, evil governments that are abusing our freedoms of speech, our openness to immigration, our openness to ideas, to weaponize and fling back in our faces and to undermine the very fabric of our societies. So I want to talk briefly about my experience as New Brunswick's Minister of Education. But for that, I'm going to take a minute to go back a little further in history. I worked for the American organization, the National Democratic Institute, for many years. And I lived in countries along the Chinese frontier. And I saw the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, arrive and seize control of political structures, of businesses, civil society organizations. And they did this not in years, but in weeks and months. And I came home to Canada in 2010 to get involved with politics back in my home province. And I saw that the same thing was happening here at home. And I could never have imagined some of the things that my colleagues here have described about these decades of infiltration, of subversion. And at first when I started to see this, I would guess like many of you when you first heard about this. It's like being part of some sort of weird group where you've had this realization that once you see it, you can't unsee it, realizing the networks of connections, of connected people, of wealth, and the part that makes me the most angry. The Canadian business people, the Canadian politicians who sold out their country, who sold out the history that we have inherited here and have the honor to try and build upon for nothing more than some cash. Not recognizing that it's those freedoms that allowed that cash to be generated in the first place. So in my province, I came back, and we had Sean Graham, who I will name specifically because he deserves to be named. A Liberal premier who during his time in office signed deal after deal after deal with the Chinese Communist Party, who went on multiple visits with some of your premiers to China, and who brought into our province the Confucius Institute. Who's heard of the Confucius Institute? Don't clap for them, my God. So this is an organization run and controlled by the Chinese Communist Party that uses what in Canada we called soft power to try and spread ideals of democracy, openness, freedom of speech, and trade. The Chinese, very good at replicating democratic ideas, spun that around. And they use those same tools through multiple organizations around the world to try and infiltrate the institutions of free societies and to undermine them. I became education minister of my province in 2018 and found out that the Chinese Communist Party was operating classes from the elementary school level through to the high school level. I knew about this because of my past work, but most people found this, it was just nice, right? What could be wrong with this? We're learning some Mandarin, we're learning about Chinese history. And it's only when you do the digging that you find out that you've got students being sent to the principal's office for asking in class whether or not the Tiananmen Square massacre was real. Asking teachers about whether or not Tibet had ever had independence. Asking about the status of Taiwan. An elementary school class who were tasked to draw a map of China and were penalized if they didn't include Taiwan. This is civics. It's just evil civics. And it goes up against the fact that in our provinces, we have not run proper civics programs for decades because we have fallen into the trap of thinking that democracy, that freedom, the ability to trade freely and to speak freely and to live the lives we want, that this is somehow something that we don't have to worry about because as Canadians, it's in our genes. It's not. We are a country of immigrants, and unless, to build on that Kennedy example, that Kennedy quote, unless we recognize our responsibility as the stewards for our provinces and our country today, we are dooming the next generations and betraying the legacy that we were fortunate enough to inherit as people blessed to live in one of the freest corners of the world. So, the Confucius Institute is in all these classes. And I come in with my background and say, I would really like to get rid of the Confucius Institute. And I mention Sean Graham, because who turns up and asks me out for a coffee? Mr. Graham, along with a representative of a Chinese private school industrial consortium. They give me a very nice gift. They give me a nice drink and dinner. And they tell me that my misunderstandings of China, that it's not really a genocidal dictatorship. It's not really a country where freedoms have been stripped from hundreds of millions of people and where a vicious dictatorship has been imposed without ever seeking the consent of the people of that country. I'm just misunderstanding. And you know what I would really need to do to really broaden my perspective? I should visit China. And this is how they get us. And I was like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to do that, because I remember when I worked for the Americans, organizing a party training on how to run elections. I was working for a politically oriented NGO. And we were teaching all the boring parts about democratic election campaigns. Everyone's experienced this on one side or the other, knocking on the doors, no one likes that, asking for small donations, that's horrible. All the nuts and bolts of democratic politics, which, as irritating as it can be, is what makes our country and others like us exceptional in the history of the world and magnets for people from around the world. Anyway, ran this program, very low cost, very bare bones, lasted 3 weeks. A couple of months later, I run into one of the participants. He goes, man, you Americans, problem being Canadian overseas, everyone thinks you're Americans, you Americans suck. You know who does a really good party training? The Chinese. The Chinese Communist Party found out every single person who participated in the program that I had run and invited them all to China for the same length of time. Slightly different itinerary. This was the Great Wall, this was banquets, this was girls, and this was $2,000 in US bills given in an envelope at the end of the program. Who do you think was going to be more effective at gaining access to Cambodian politicians? Anyway, based on that, not very interested in going to China. Mr. Graham goes away. A couple of months later, something happens that as a politician I have never experienced in the various countries I worked in overseas or that I've seen here at home. The Chinese vice consul turned up in my office from his in Montreal to tell me, without invitation again, that it would be really sad. You got to picture this in sort of the Italian sort of mafia guy, sort of doing that. It'd be really sad, you know, if with all this misunderstanding around education and the Confucius Institute, if something was to happen to, not that there's any connection, something was to happen to New Brunswick lobster sales in China, millions of dollars of lobster sales. Not as good as PEI's, right, I gotta say that. But this was the sort of game that they're playing. The consul trekked around Fredericton for a couple of days, telling the premier, telling other ministers that, you know, this Carty guy, he's really putting you at risk, telling the Liberal opposition, this guy, he's threatening your lobster industry, all because of a cultural misunderstanding. What's wrong with, I thought Canada was a multicultural country. What's wrong with learning Mandarin? I made it very clear that that was not going to fly. The meeting ended after some time. I delivered a tape recording of the meeting that I had made to CSIS, and nothing happened after that. So on the one hand, good. The Communist Party recognized this was probably not a fight worth having, a small province, slowly got rid of the Confucius Institute over a couple of years because our contract did not include an escape clause for the government of New Brunswick, only for the Communist Party of China, which was interesting. Great, I think the criticism of lawyers there is certainly well placed. And of course, the lobster sales weren't affected because there's an insatiable desire for lobster in the upper ranks of the Chinese Communist Party, not something your average Chinese citizen could ever afford. But the part that I wanted to raise with all of you is the fact that, as I mentioned, I delivered a full audio of that meeting to our intelligence services. And we are now on to our second investigation of foreign interference in Canada. And I have not been asked once despite, I believe, being the most public example of a public official in Canada being subject to direct, on the record, foreign interference. It's on tape. Until we wake up, we are done for as a democracy. Until we recognize that we have to stand up against what General Eyre, our outgoing Chief of Defense Staff, said in October of 22, in front of a committee in Ottawa, that we are at war with China and Russia. That's the head of our armed forces saying that, not some guy on a YouTube channel. Canada has lived for too long under the illusion that we are protected by our neighbor to the south, who is going through its own difficulties as the result of foreign interference. And we need to stand up, as Democrats have for over 200 years, to fight for this inheritance. You can do it. We were able to get rid of the Confucius Institute in New Brunswick schools. Here, you'll be able to reform your laws if you want to. But none of this is going to come easily, because you're up against people who have vast amounts of power and money, who research carefully on how to manipulate and influence the subjects for their targets of investigation, and are incredibly good at it. You don't become a dictatorial party able to control over 1 billion people by not being competent. So do not underestimate our enemy, but do not think for a second that they are anything but our enemy. And when they arrive here and talk about investments and jobs and business, recognize that they are throwing our own cash and innovations back at us so that we can see our democracy undermined and destroyed. That is the explicit goal after the last party conference in Beijing, is to undermine and destroy Western democracies. It's happening on the battlefields of Europe. It's happening, I was in Taiwan last summer where they're preparing for a Chinese invasion. The world is a lot smaller than we think, and we need to act here, and we need to act now, and we have examples to be proud of, but most importantly, we have a country filled with immigrants from around the world, including hundreds of thousands of ethnically Chinese Canadians who know full well the horrors of the Chinese Communist Party and its government, and who would do anything to avoid that coming here. Let's help them. Let's make this country free again. And I really appreciate the chance from Dean and the rest to be here on this panel today. Thank you so much.
The mic on now? Can you hear me? Oh, great. So, first of all, again, you've heard some interesting anecdotal, you've heard some direct information and evidence, you've heard about personal experience. I travel around the world. I work with the Uyghurs, who have had perpetrated, over 1 million of them have been killed by the genocidal dictatorship in Beijing. I work with the Tibetans. Last year, with the China Nexus, my author Benedict Rogers and I presented the China Nexus to His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala. That was a great honor. His Holiness stood for interviews for that book. I work with some of the most well-versed, some of the former intelligence people, some of the smartest people in the world who understand what's going on with the Chinese Communist Party. I bring some of those voices to the table, and that's what I do as a publisher. I bring here today some experts, people with real perspective, but again, this mission relies on you, and you being informed and understanding what's going on. So for the RCMP and the other intelligence people that are in the room, let's make it perfectly clear, it's important that we defend our democracy. It's time now for us to stand up, or we will lose this battle. So now we're going to go into the panel, and the subjects I want to talk about is we're going to go back to 1998. We're going to talk a little bit about Sidewinder, and we're going to talk about your first real encounter, because Garry was in Hong Kong in the High Commission. He noticed the first immigration fraud, the same type of immigration fraud that came to this island with the PNP program. That is one of the biggest conduits to the Chinese Communist Party gaining entrance access to Canada was through PEI. Cash for access, instant landed immigrant status. Only 3 in 10 actually showed up here in the province. So that's where it all starts, but let's go back to Sidewinder. And Michel, why don't you start off in terms of your experience there and what you saw and what you brought to the government?
Yeah, putting you back a little bit into perspective, because eventually we're talking about the big picture. We're talking about the world, we're talking about the confrontation that is taking place, but ultimately you're here to hear about what happened in PEI and how it affected PEI. Back in the early 90s, I don't know if you recall, 1997, Hong Kong was to return to China mainland. And that was a source of preoccupation for a lot of Hong Kongers. So a lot of people wanted to come to Canada. Mr. Mulroney was very, very involved with Hong Kong, was receiving money from Hong Kong, and was participating by creating a class of immigrant that did not exist before, which is entrepreneur immigrant. So basically, if you had $200,000 or more, you could invest right here in Canada and literally buy your Canadian citizenship by being a so-called entrepreneur. But the problem is that we witnessed that among this guy, because very little check and background check was done, a lot of triads, a lot of organized crime was capable to come in at the same time. And that was confirmed by Brian McAdam and Garry, that were already in Hong Kong and witnessing this to happen. So that's what led us to start to investigate a little bit more this immigration stream that was coming to us. But it was an extremely lucrative exercise at the same time for the government. And good part is they were going to share that with the provinces. That's where now it started to apply exactly here in PEI, is that with the complicity of some of the elite in Ottawa, the elite in PEI saw a beautiful opportunity to receive hundreds of millions of dollars, literally, that was distributed to a handful of people only. It didn't benefit the island. It benefited few, unfortunately. When we investigated here, we saw exactly the same problem, the same situation taking place. When they are here, some of them, not all, some are legitimate, some are really people who would like to sort of establish themselves here, open a business and do business. But when you look at the ratio, these are facts. These are not speculation or conspiracy. When you look at the ratio of the number of people that came through PEI, paid their way in, and stayed in PEI to benefit PEI and profit, make profit to the island, the ratio doesn't jive. It doesn't work. Too many people left to go in other places in the country. That was just the port of entry. That was just the way to get in. And the politicians were on the take, period.
And Garry, you know, Gary's experience with respect to triads, and he actually wrote the book for CSIS and the RCMP on triads. And you were experiencing this and seeing how this flow came into the country and business tycoons tied to triad organizations.
The bottom line when all this was going on, and I'm going to show you how one person can make a difference. Between Brian and I, it was a daily, almost daily, I wrote probably 4 or 5 briefs to RCMP headquarters talking about triads that were had applied to come into the country. We had an immigration department that actually turned a blind eye. I have no doubt some of them got the red packets. And it was a free-for-all. Well, we've got to let them in. They got $200,000. And I was appalled, as people will soon find if you read my book. I wasn't your typical RCMP. I didn't, just because somebody said something didn't mean it was right. And so I challenged that to a point where I got cooperation from the Royal Hong Kong Police, working side by side with them. And here's a sad fact. When I first went down to meet with the head of the Triad Bureau, he said, well, yeah, it's nice to meet you, but we don't work with the Canadians. And I said, what do you mean you don't work with the Canadians? He said, well, anybody that's been here before you, They come down, shake our hand, we never see them again, and we give them all this intelligence about triads, and nobody does anything, so we just quit giving it to you. And I said, well, I will do what I can to make a difference. So I had a stack. Brian wasn't able, because of his level in the mission, wasn't able to hold off the immigration officers. But I could under being part of a criminal organization. So I had a file cabinet moved in my office which contained immigration files, and I just refused to give them back. And it turned out that I found out, thanks to our former Barbara McDougall, God bless her soul, she had allowed a number of things to happen, and one of them was that it was not an offense to be a member of an organized crime group or be affiliated with an organized crime group. That was not a prohibitive ground to come to our wonderful country. Makes sense. I mean, we like to have our criminals and keep police busy. So I was appalled. So I knew there was a new immigration bill in the works to be written, and I wrote ad infinitum, trying to get the RCMP off their big fat butts in Ottawa to push this. But commissioners and deputy ministers, so how dare you speak out against your political leaders? So thank God for the news. I had a journalist that I knew in Southern News, and I went to him and I gave him the whole story, and I said, but there's only one condition. You've got to say your source was out of Ottawa. You can't say out of Hong Kong because my career will be over. Say it's out of Ottawa. They're too stupid then to investigate and find out who it was. It went in, it raised what I'm hoping the media does today. It raised enough concern in Ottawa that in the 11th hour, they put in a section that it was enough. You could not come to this country if you're a member of an organized crime group or affiliated to. So it can happen. The problem is, though, how do we get our political leaders? And I thank you very much, Dominique. It's such a pleasure to hear somebody that's got the same views as all of us, because that's few and far between, sadly, in politics. We've just got to hold our political leaders to account. We do. It's what we're seeing, the triads that we got in this country, and believe me, we have triads. I have pictures of premiers, I have pictures of chiefs of police standing, shaking hands in front of triad altars in this country with known triad figures. Now, for you and I, it doesn't probably mean anything. But if you saw that same picture standing in front of a Hells Angels crest, I guarantee every one of you in the room would say, why is he doing that? Well, all the Chinese citizens, Canadian Chinese citizens have seen that. What message does that send? They're in the pocket of triads. And believe me, I have spoken to a lot of Chinese communities because they are under siege here in Canada. The fact that Chinese police officers are here, that's a fact. I don't care whether they're suing or not, they're here. And we've allowed them to be here. That started prior to my leaving the force in 2003, because I was ahead of the financial crime program, and I met with a whole bunch of Chinese officials that got sort of put off from the commissioner's office down the chain to me to deal with them, and they were saying how they wanted us to go out and seize all these individuals because they were economic criminals in China. What that means is they embarrass the ruling party, and they wanted them back so they could throw them in jail and never be heard from again. And that's how this has all started, and we let it happen.
Yeah. And so moving forward, over the last few years, obviously the awareness about the Chinese Communist Party, all different levels of hybrid warfare has come to the forefront, and we're talking a little bit about what some of these hybrid warfare tactics are here today. The use of the triads, things that we call lawfare, the use of the Confucius Institutes, disinformation operations, to which I just gave a symposium on in Montreal to the Uyghur community so they can engage, so that they can fight back against disinformation operations by the Chinese Communist Party. But some of the greatest disinformation operations are the photo ops that key individuals take with our prime ministers and our leaders. And some of those are in the Mosaic effect, including a known triad, actually probably the head of the United Front in Canada, standing posing with the prime minister of the country. But this has happened with the former prime minister before Trudeau as well. So remember, this is not just a one-party system. This is not, this is not about Justin Trudeau. This is not about the Conservative Party. It's not about any party in PEI. Transnational repression by the Chinese Communist Party is here. And in your province, Dominic, you've probably seen some of this on the transnational repression, because actually the Mosaic effect is a counterintelligence operation, neither dissuaded nor condoned by Five Eyes, actually working with people within the Chinese diaspora community, the Uyghur community, who want to be supported by the Canadian government, but felt afraid and were oppressed by the Chinese Communist Party here in our own country, allowing them to be intimidated on an ongoing basis, threatened with their lives, threatening their family back home with murder. In some cases, they killed them. And I want to let you know that that's the regime we're talking about. Let me just pick up on that a little bit.
Yeah, this made me think of something that I experienced when I first raised the issues around the Confucius Institutes in New Brunswick schools, that I had a ethnically Chinese woman who lived in my constituency reach out to me through an intermediary to meet somewhere other than my constituency office or my ministerial office after dark, because she was afraid of what would happen if anyone knew she was talking to me. This is in New Brunswick, which is certainly a lot more multicultural now than it was 20 years ago, has a much larger ethnically Chinese population, isn't large enough to have, as far as we know, one of the Chinese Communist Party unofficial police stations operating on our territory. But at the same time, this woman was so spooked that she had to go through those levels of security to raise concerns around something that I think is a good example of how we're running into a crisis in Canada right now. Because at the same time as I was trying to kick the Confucius Institute out of our schools, we had pressure on our Minister of Local Government to introduce a law allowing folks who came to Canada, who had permanent residency, but not yet citizenship, to be able to vote in provincial and municipal elections. So this was seen as being a nice way of introducing people to New Brunswick democracy, to opening the doors to our country, showing how freedom can work in practice for people who maybe weren't even going to become citizens. The woman who I talked to spoke for a number of people who reached out through similarly complicated means because of the fear they were under, to say, in the name of God, please don't do this. And that, I think, is where we're running into this cultural clash right now. Whereas we want to be open and welcoming to newcomers, including to people trying to escape dictatorships. But that law, as Dean just said, would have exposed that woman's family back in China to massive amounts of pressure and intimidation, up to and possibly including arrest, torture, and death. And it seemed so far away from our little legislature in Fredericton talking about those issues in those ways. But we have to remember, whenever we're talking about what we do as engaged and active Canadian citizens, that we have rights most people cannot dream of. And it's up to us to use them, and so that when someone becomes a Canadian citizen, those rights actually mean something, unlike a Chinese passport, which is basically just a ticket to an incarceration camp if you speak out of line. So things like that, where what looks like a progressive, open move is actually a move backward, I think is how the rubber meets the democratic road for us as Canadian citizens. So let's stand for an open country, but a country that stands by it and for its values, not for one that gets pushed around and used by foreign interference operations like the ones we're talking about.
Michel and both Garry want to, on that. So thank you. One of the most disappointing things for Chinese immigrants and Hong Kong immigrants, Uyghurs, who've come to this country, is the lack of support that they've received from police services to protect them. They're running away from a communist dictatorship, but only find themselves to be oppressed on an ongoing basis.
There's a reason for that.
And there's a reason, so go ahead.
And the reason is because we do not have a clear definition of what foreign interference is about.
Yeah.
You see, a whistleblower or blowers came out in October 2022 to the Globe and Mail and Global News and gave documents from CSIS, original documents saying, we did advise Mr. Trudeau that the election in 2019, 2021 were affected by Chinese foreign interference in 11 ridings. We told him. Following that, Mr. Trudeau negated that, said, no, I don't recall that CSIS told me that or anything like this. The law, CSIS Act, is extremely clear. You can only advise Minister of Public Safety and the Prime Minister. And the documents that leak were very clear. He was told. So in the winter and spring of 2023, a couple months later, close to 350 witnesses, expert witnesses, and we were part of that, came to testify in front of 4 different parliamentary committees. We all said, yes, Chinese foreign interference has been observed for the last 30 years. All the prime ministers were told, one after the other. But Mr. Trudeau went on to sort of drag, refuse, finally wanted to offer a special rapporteur, which happened to have to sort of quit at the end because he was found to be inadequate, because he was a family member or friends, I should say.
And he was elite captured.
And is an elite captured also. Then to drag all summer, then eventually in the fall say, okay, we're going to go with the public inquiry. But all the information about if I was told or not will have to be kept secret because that's CSIS national security. So you'll never find out. And we'll have a judge who also a family friend that will be running the show. And by the way, the Uyghur and the Hong Kong people pulled out because they're saying 3 of the elected officials that are known to be agent of Beijing are allowed to be on the committee and to interrogate the witnesses that will come. But at one point we're saying, okay, how much do you need to know more? 350 experts came to you and said, yes, we have been observing that for the last 30 years. Meanwhile, we don't have a law that defines what foreign interference is about. So therefore, the strategy that they use right here with the politician in PEI, with the wine and dine exercise and the recruitment that they've done, made them addict of Chinese money, literally. They became addict, and they made a fortune. And meanwhile, if you want to really understand, and I'm going to give a chance to the other, if you want to really understand how the Chinese government thinks about the rest of the world, 2 things you have to do. Read The Art of War again. That was written 2,000 years ago by Sun Tzu, a general who explained the power of influence. 2,000 years ago, you know the expression, they wrote the book? They wrote the book 2,000 years ago. They understand exactly. You're not going to teach them how to suck an egg. They invented it. Second, learn the game of Go. The game of Go, search it. It's an Asian games, millennium old, and it's all about capturing territory. So the grab of land, the grab of territory, the grab of spaces, business, political, and military, extremely important in their strategy. Extremely important. And here, you let it happen.
We've been letting it happen for too long. Garry, do you have a final?
I can be very short, just sort of following up on that. Some of you will have read stuff, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, it would take too long, but the Belt and Road Initiative is something that is openly spoken about by the Chinese. Teaching it. If you go to any of the Caribbean islands today, and I can name a number of them, and look at their brand new airports, who do you think built it? It's the Chinese. What do you think that has done for them? Well, the Caribbean island can't pay for it, so guess what? They're under the Chinese influence. And I can name a number of islands. Africa, they're doing exactly the same thing. That is part of the Belt and Road Initiative. PEI, coming here, getting land, is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, spreading their tentacles. One other point I want to make, and that's to follow up just how insidious what we're seeing is going on and how we're so naive to it. I was in London, I work occasionally down in London, Ontario, and the Bondsfield was going on. And there was a Chinese couple in from British Columbia, Richmond. As you know, Richmond is, I think, 54%, if I'm not mistaken now, Asian. And we were talking, and when they realized I'd been in Hong Kong and that I understood a little bit about the culture, this lady said to me, "Why aren't more police officers in Canada trained?" I said, "Well, yeah, I accept that, but what are you getting at?" She says, "Do you realize that every business, Chinese business, has to pay protection money to organized crime? Every Chinese business." I had no reason to doubt her, but isn't that a sad statement? However, after seeing what Toronto did, I don't know if you saw that, where your best protection now for looking after your car is make sure your keys are at the front door, and so they don't have to break into your house. I don't know, I kind of agree with Clint Eastwood. There should be a sign outside that says, are you a religious person? Because I'm suggesting you get it right with Jesus, because you're going to visit St. Peter's real quick if you come through that door.
So picking up on that, and of course, I was asked, kind of to look at this, look at the island, et cetera, a little bit more fully. And of course, my experience with working with South Pacific and the Solomon Islands, I watched the exact same thing happen where 39 out of the 50 politicians that were part of the parliamentary, we'll call it a council, they're running a parliamentary democracy, but 39 out of the 50 had received a direct payment from the Chinese Communist Party through the consulate. Direct cash in the bag. When I enlightened the State Department about PEI last week in Montreal and talked specifically about the islands on the East Coast, Barbados comes to mind. And the funny story about Barbados is that the president, they've switched. They used to be a Commonwealth country, or now they've renounced the Queen. That's okay, they can do that. Except guess what? They showed up with $2 million and gave it to the president. He says, he said to the State Department, "What do you expect me to do? They're giving me cash in the bag. What is America offering me?" So that's what you're up against, just to let you know. And this thing is happening, and it's happened all over the world with a lot more than $2 million in a lot of cases.
But it's important to stress, it's really, really, really important to stress, not generalize too much.
Yeah.
To the point where everybody looks Asian will go into the same grounder.
Yeah.
That's not the case at all. That's not the case at all. We're talking about professional investigation that were taken and done in order to be capable to identify exactly the chain of command, the chain of direction that was taking place. Unfortunately, in this exercise, we revealed that a lot of politicians were part and accomplice. They became agent of influence, what Stalin used to call the useful idiots. But it's exactly what is taking place. And it's not all businesses that are necessarily agent of the spy world. That's not the question that what we're talking about. But we need to be capable to conduct due diligence. We need to be capable to be very astute of what's going on, and particularly the politicians. But the problem is that, because I want to come back to what's going on here in this island, there's a lack of accountability. There's a lack of accountability, and it's been going on for a long period of time.
Yeah, it's true of around the world, and the accountability here, accountability in Ottawa. The move towards embracing China was that it was going to be a win-win panacea for all of us, and the Americans, and we outsourced our manufacturing a great deal to China because they could deliver it to us cheaper, more cost effectively, and we bought into that, and it lowered our inflation. But at the same time, they're using forced and slave labor to actually produce products that you're buying, and that's why in the United States, where they're really starting to tackle these things. Pardon?
Some forced labor. Some
forced labor. With Uyghur forced labor. It is happening, and we have to be aware of these things that are happening. But the Americans are putting in a Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. It's getting some teeth. It's stopping shipments that they can, actually ensure that they're actually coming from forced labor areas. And we work closely with the Uyghurs here in Canada and the United States to ensure that that kind of legislation gets through. In Canada, there will be a new bill. Ottawa is waking up and doing some things. MP John McKay, a great individual on human rights and has fought for the Uyghurs and Tibetans for a long, long time. There's some new legislation coming out, and it is welcome legislation. So they're finally getting some answers. It's starting to come together. So just on, trying to talk about engagement a little bit. And this whole thing, we understand transnational oppression against Chinese language people who have come here, are wanting to have freedom and democracy, Tibetans, Uyghurs, Taiwanese, those who are Falun Gong, who've had their organs harvested, et cetera. Dominic, you've seen some transnational oppression in New Brunswick. That's playing out every day. You talked a little bit about that experience with one of your constituents. How do you see governments taking action to protect the rights of all of our citizens?
Well, I think the first thing is it comes back to us as citizens. Next election campaign, ask your federal and provincial candidates, have you received anything from the Chinese Communist Party? Have you gone on a paid trip to the People's Republic of China? If you did, what did you do? Why did you do that? Bump the issue up. Because one of the reasons that this has flown under the radar for so long is it is literally far away. And for provincial politicians especially, it seems even more distant. And I know the island, it's like back home. You're talking about small constituencies, a few thousand people. Most of the folks running to be your provincial representatives are doing it to try and help out and build a rec center or get the hospital upgraded or the usual reasons people run for office at the local level. You can't expect them to have the level of knowledge around this file that the gang of us do because it's been part of our lives for different coincidental reasons. So it's up to you, as folks who are aware enough to spend a St. Patrick's Day afternoon talking about this, to raise this with your politicians. The same way that we raise issues around hospitals being closed or kids not being able to read. So unless we make this important, the politicians aren't going to think it is important. Because if our politicians have one great failure in the early 21st century, is that all they do is read the polls and try and figure out how to get ahead of them, and that there's a serious absence of leadership and efforts to really change things. So push as citizens, but the next thing, even more difficult. If you get folks like that elected, who get what's going on, who get why this is dangerous, that is going to mean a change in your standard of living. This is going to cost us. We are not going to be able to separate from China and protect ethnic Chinese and other people fleeing dictatorships who come to Canada unless we have an economy that's based on democracies. And that transition is going to be hard. And it's going to mean things are going to cost more. It's going to mean disruptions and delays in getting things that we're used to getting faster and cheaper. That is going to happen. And if any politician tells you otherwise, they are lying to you. So demand honesty from your politicians about the costs of freedom and democracy, and make it clear that you're willing to make that payment on behalf of future generations. That is the only way we get out of this. And it means in a democracy, us accepting the sacrifice that is going to come. Because better to have that be a sacrifice we make through more expensive or difficult to get products than having a loss of freedom and the destruction of our country, or, God forbid, young Canadian men and women being called to fight on battlefields anywhere in the world. Countries across Europe are reintroducing conscription this week. Russia is able to prosecute its war in Ukraine because of Chinese backing. There are countries that are introducing universal conscription for men and women, Denmark being one of them. When's that going to happen here? Yeah. And it's going to happen when we let things slide to the point that that's our last recourse. Right now, we are still a lucky country. We are still privileged to have a bit of time, but not long. Demand more from your politicians, and we have a chance of getting out of this. We have to show that democracy works by the citizens in democracies insisting on change, and that only comes from you.
So before we go to Joan, Michel, do you have a comment? And Garry, I don't know if you have a closing comment, or so just quickly.
I'd love to continue a little bit on what Dominic has just said, because very, very simple. You know, when you compare political system, dictatorship is damn efficient. It's really, really efficient. You don't have a say. You can go really, really fast because you do whatever you want to do. You're the dictator and everything. So what goes with democracy is, and dictatorship are two different words. Dictatorship, opacity. It's opaque. You don't see things. Democracy, it's accountability, transparency. And that's how we need to be capable to sort to, so that's what we will defend, and we must defend. We need to be capable. Unfortunately, it took place. I'm not saying that you're living in a dictatorship in the PEI, but it was very opaque. It was very, very cloudy. People were not able to see exactly what was going on. If you were blue from generation, you would stay blue and you would wait until your blue party comes to power. If you were red, you would stay red all your life, and you would wait until the other one. And then you would make as much as possible benefit of that 5 or 4 years and that during. Do not tolerate that anymore. Do not tolerate that.
I'll just, I'll sort of shut this side of it down very quickly. I won't say I was sitting around the table the other night having a couple drinks, and I was sitting there listening to it. And I said to everybody in the room, I now know how people must have felt when Hitler came to power. We were sitting there talking about the democracy of what's happened here in PEI, what's happened in the rest of Canada. And I thought, isn't this sad? We had 2 world wars where everybody fought for freedom, and now we're talking about the risk of our freedom. And I honestly can say that's how I felt. I don't want to ever feel that way again, so I will be very vocal on this going forward.
So I think with that, Joe McDonald, we have a couple questions for us.
I think I need to take a breath. I think we all do. The room is very quiet and still. Whoa. I have 6 questions, none of which 5 questions, none of which I'm going to ask, because they've all been answered by the panel. You've answered every one of the questions I brought, but I do have one left, and it's for you, Dean. When will the book on PEI be released?
Not soon enough. So our journalistic investigation continues, gathering data. We'll be busy writing the book over the summer. My hopes is that we launch this book out by the end of this year, probably November. But give me a call. You have some information to share. You have some evidence. You have some insights. I'm happy to hear from you, and that will help make a really, really good book. I think we have enough data already to make a really good book, but your participation all in this room and the people that we met are going to make that difference. So I'm hoping to bring it out by the end of this year for 2024. We're in 2024. Yes.
Great, and we'll hold you accountable to that.
Oh, there you go. Thank you. Well, these guys are going to be writing it as well, so I'm going to put some pressure on these guys.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So, Islanders, you have some Islanders questions.
Yeah. So we were going to use index cards and have you write them, but that's not possible, nor is it probably ideal. So what we'd like you to do is, if you have a question, we're probably going to take, 3 questions, 4 questions?
3 or 4 questions, yes.
3 or 4
Sure.
questions. If you have a question, I'd like you to be very succinct when you ask it. Not a lot of commentary, but really clearly ask your question and the panel, and address it to one of the panelists if there is someone you want to address your question, answer your question. We have 1 microphone here. You will need to use a microphone, and so I will find you somewhere in the crowd. Just raise your hand, and we already have 1 woman over here on the left. And if you want to come to me and I will come to you, I will pass this off to you.
A meeting of the minds.
Also say your name.
I'm Grace Cameron from East Point. I'm sad,
Hi, Grace.
I'm angry, I'm a little sick to my stomach about what I've heard here this afternoon. And I'm essentially being asked to believe, horrifyingly, that my Prime Minister, all of the MPs in Canada, and all of the MLAs, with one exception, are on the take. That flabbergasts me. And it saddens me greatly. So my question, and perhaps Mr. Carter, you could address this first. Is it automatic that as soon as somebody says, I'm a politician, that I walk through the door of corruption? How do I know that that person that I'm voting for is going to or has walked through that door? And in your case, how do we get them to go through the door of non-corruption? What can we do? And I know it's about accountability. And also, how do we get the people that are not here this afternoon, but who live in PEI, to begin to ask the question? Because I'll quite frankly think that sometimes we're our own worst enemy.
Just quickly before you, I just want to say this, not all politicians are corrupt.
Yeah.
And I want to make that very, very clear. There's dedicated individuals that have served this island, have served this country, that continue to do that with dignity and with integrity and objectivity. So no, we're not talking about every politician here. So I just want to qualify that. Thank you. Dominic.
But I think to combine, Dean, your comment with the question, the problem isn't individuals so much. Because I've had the chance I've been a member of 2 established political parties. I was leader of the New Brunswick NDP and then a progressive conservative cabinet minister, which might seem a bit weird. I'm happy to talk about that with anyone who wants to afterwards. I'm now leading a new federal political party based actually largely on trying to stop things like foreign interference and make us actually spend some money on defense, which would be nice given we're at war. But that's also another story. Happy to talk about that with folks later. So it's not so much individuals who are personally corrupted. It is a system that is prone to being corrupt. Because weirdly in Canada, I caveat this because my first country I worked overseas was Bangladesh, which at that time was generally seen as being the most corrupt country in the world. And there was a great editorial cartoon of an Olympic podium with the Bangladeshi standing in the #1 place and passing a bribe to the judge behind it, which I always thought was a great illustration of corruption. But that was a country where people got rich off being in politics. Most Canadian politicians, when they leave office, sell used cars, go back to doing what they were doing before. The opportunities for most of them to make money is very small, even if they did want to. And so that's a really important caveat, that we do not have hundreds of corrupt politicians. What we do have is people who are reacting with the same shock that I saw on the faces of some of the folks in this crowd this afternoon, who haven't heard some of this information before, because it sounds crazy. And I was saying to a couple of the folks on the stage before we started that for me, it was really only the beginning of this year that it felt like finally there's been a bit of a switch flipped, that people are getting that maybe this war in Europe is kind of a big deal. Maybe China is actually much more of a threat than we realized. So what I'd ask you to do, as folks who get what's going on, is first off, be kind. I thought that our opening up to China in the 80s was the dumbest thing ever because I'm a Democrat, I always have been, and I think dictatorships are repulsive and democracy shouldn't trade with them, full stop. And it was the biggest mistake of our lives to trade the wealth of our democratic inheritance with people who used that wealth to murder their own citizens. A huge flaw, and I think it'll be seen as one for generations. But that was what nearly everyone thought for a long time. So we should all be in the spirit of people trying to convert people to their religion. We should be open to new converts. So if someone says, I get it, whether they were a cabinet minister, an MLA, an MNA, local councillor, give them the chance to repent and show their repentance through action. And that action, though, should come, I would suggest, through some concrete steps. Support a foreign interest registry in Canada. We don't have one. It's utterly insane. It allows people to come down to the provincial level and exert influence in a way that most countries would view as totally unacceptable. Ask your federal representatives where they stand, for example, on banning TikTok, a platform owned by the Chinese Communist Party with connections to the People's Liberation Army. The Americans are finally getting on track with banning it. we need to follow suit because it is undermining democracy to the point that we are poisoning a generation of young people with anti-democratic ideals and with ideas of self-harm and destruction that are causing suicides across our country. There's a reason China doesn't allow a Chinese software platform to operate in China, because they know it's dangerous. So why on earth do we allow it to be unleashed on our own citizens? So ask your representatives to live up to the standards that we're talking about here. Foreign interest registries, banning inappropriate platforms, acting against land purchases that are clearly against the spirit of the law. Make those calls. And don't, but my closing word is this, don't believe the promises. Ask for evidence of action, and if someone doesn't act after they've said they will do something, don't vote for them again. Whether it's for building a new hospital or promising to act against foreign interference. We've got to stop the democratic backsliding that we've seen in the last 20 years, part of which is nothing to do with foreigners. It's about us losing confidence, losing expectations for our politicians. Demand more from people who ask to sit in the seats that I occupy right now. Demand more, insist on more, and punish the ones who don't deliver. But don't let them get away with your low expectations. Demand more. That'll be my message.
Yeah, the other thing I want to add, and Ainsley, I know you've heard me beat the drum on this one. I'm a proud ex-member of the RCMP. I had a hell of a career. But you know what? We got to change the RCMP. We don't have a federal force capable of taking on national, transnational organized crime. What is going on with China? Because citizens, provinces are insisting we keep this lovely red surge in your province. It's a contract. We need federal policing. And by you keeping your contracts and demanding them, federal policing will never, ever be able to take on what we're dealing with today. We need an FBI, we need a DEA. And believe me, if you don't get it, we don't get it, we are going to continue to pay a price like you've never seen before. We are the #1 place in the world for transnational organized crime to park in. Why? Because we're a sieve. That's why you're experiencing what you're experiencing. Wake up, because fentanyl is going to rape and pillage your province coming up. And what it's going to do, and I did this on a media presentation, your hospitals, you think they're backlogged now on a weekend? Wait till you start the fentanyl crisis and all the overdoses going in on a weekend, and every 3 to 4 people have to look after that person that's overdosed. It will shut down your emergency departments. It's time we did something.
Yeah.
Before Michelle, just on that point, 3 of the largest transnational organized crime groups call their headquarters somewhere in Ontario, and there's a number more in Vancouver. This has been highlighted in House of Commons security report in 2022. The information's there, there's knowledge is there, the understanding is there. It's just what, it's actually getting the force to work with to actually interdict and make things happen and stop what's going on. Michelle?
I'll skip, we'll go for the next question,
next question,
because I want to give a chance to have more questions.
Thank you. And in Irish, for St. Patrick's, Giadich. I'm a veteran, 24 years and a bit service in the Canadian Armed Forces. I used to work in the Diefenbunker.
Thank you for your service.
Well, I called my former member of parliament for Malpeque, and I said, there's something going on with these Chinese and the land transfers, and I think I'm seeing money laundering. And he said, oh, I called CSIS about it. I said, wait a minute, CSIS doesn't look at that, it's FinTrack. And I looked up FinTrack, and I contacted them. And they even have a rule that if you grass somebody, they're going to give your name out. So it's very difficult for people to report things and then to have a follow-up if you know that you accuse someone anonymously but your name will be revealed.
Yep.
So there's a lot of other things that have to be done. Now, I did call FinTrack. I also called my member of parliament. But What we have to do now is find another way to hold them to account, because it's only every 4 or 5 years you vote the boogers in or you vote the boogers out, and you still get the same thing. So what do you recommend?
Well, on the comment on reporting to FinTrack, it should be the RCMP. FinTrack is the intelligence arm. It requires financial institutions and other sundry groups that are mandatory reporting. I still, because I will file, I've filed, I don't know how many, probably close to 100 reports since I left the RCMP on reports have been given to me on real horrific stories on Iran. I think I've discussed it, Hainsley, with you a few times on what's happened on Yonge Street. I did file those, but I filed them with an anonymous source. I never burnt the source. So there is ways of doing it. FinTrack, you have to understand, they're not enforcement. They're strictly an intelligence arm. They have a big computer system, puts all the linkages together, and if they reach a reasonable suspicion, it's given out to some law enforcement agency and/or CSIS if it's a terrorism occurrence. So don't overestimate what FinTrack does. FinTrack has done a great job. I am now part of my bank. We pay for them. We pay for their the cost because the banks got hit. We pay all the compliance costs now, starting this year for FinTrack. So we'll probably be regulated more because they have to justify their existence. FinTrack does a good job. But the analogy I use, we built FinTrack, great, it's a Rolls Royce. What's going to drive that? It's prosecution and enforcement. We forgot the engine, and that's prosecution and enforcement.
Yeah, that, very quick, on Gary's book launch in Ottawa, one of the directors of FinTrack was there. We've had discussions since with the Director of Intelligence with respect to what's going on, and Sam Cooper, Willful Blindness, which is the first book that I published specifically on the threat of transnational organized crime here in the country, and these two gentlemen were very much part of that book, and that's how I got to know them, was because of that book. And if you want to know why we're having an inquiry, first of all, the Cullen Commission, and now an inquiry in Ottawa, it's because of the books, it's because of the push by certain journalists in this country that are pushing the envelope against the politicians. So that's what has to happen, and that's what we're doing. Michel.
I want to keep my comment very short and I invite everybody to be short because I want to hear from the Islanders. Yeah. CSIS is not a law enforcement organization. Right. CSIS does not have power of arrest or prosecution or anything like this. The RCMP does. Unfortunately, in 1994, Mr. Trudeau's father made intentionally the mistake to create CSIS, and we should not have a CSIS. We should have a law enforcement like the RCMP to be capable to prosecute, just like the FBI has. But if you want something, you need to go to the RCMP. That's where something could happen. Should happen.
Next question.
Hello, my name is Trish Bruce. I have a little question here. Well, first I want to make a statement. I find an awful lot of Islanders are oblivious to what's going on here.
And a lot of people around the world are oblivious.
They're completely oblivious, and like you said before, you vote red or blue, alternating, but why are we being squelched? Why is none of this in the news? CBC doesn't cover it, nobody covers it. Why aren't we being informed of what's going on? They're treating us like we're stupid. I'm happy you're coming out with a book on PEI. Please give out free copies to everybody on the island.
Hey, I do a lot of freebies all the time. I'm hoping you might be able to spend $20 on a book.
Anyway, the only reason I know anything about any of this is because of David Weale.
Does anyone wanna-
I
Go
will
ahead.
make one comment, and I can tell you, the media, for me, has been the reason I've been able to get a message out. They have been absolutely sensational. Ainsley has gone above and beyond. Yeah, sorry. You've gone above and beyond. I have a couple other journalists that have gone above and beyond. And they will tell you, how many times have I called you on story after story? Because I'm not in politics. I can't get an audience. So I agree with you. Don't ask me about CBC. I have my own opinions, and I'll leave it at that. But
No.
you can get, there is some phenomenal journalists out there that I think have done a service. They're here today, and they're here for one reason. They want to get the story.
Thank you. Thank you.
And just, we did invite CBC, and I sent a nice note to the head of CBC, emphasizing why they should show up. Michel.
CCPI.
CBCPI, sorry.
It's not everything.
Michel spoke with the French language PI, and they gave him 15 minutes on Friday to talk about this issue.
Absolutely, and I want to be careful because I echo what Brian just said. There is some fantastic journalism being done in Canada, and matter of fact, it's our last line of defense in many cases. We need them. We need the journalists. So just to paint everybody with the same brush, just like I don't want to paint all the Chinese with the same brush, we have to be very specific. But yes, unfortunately, as part of the investigation, we did find out that there is realm of influence that are exercised by what we call, and you heard that before, the backroom boys that are really manipulating the strawmans that have been elected. And they are there to manipulate also, unfortunately, some of the media. Not all the media, but some of the media. Some of the newspapers that you have on this island are not present today. Why?
So Dean, can I help? Dean, can I help in that one for a second?
Unfortunately, sorry.
I just wanted to just quickly address that one, because I think the point around the media is really important, because the media are trained to look to who when it comes to questions of international politics? The politicians. In New Brunswick, I got wall-to-wall coverage for the stories about the Confucius Institute that I talked about earlier, all the way through. Afterwards, some real digging done by people from both the Telegraph Journal and CBC and CBC French as well. The problem is the politicians keep on not realizing this is a problem, or in some cases are actually complicit. But most of the time, it's because someone turned up at their office and said, man, you wouldn't want this law to go any further up because that could really affect the sale of sea urchins or whatever else. It's trying to put that bigger context in front of the politicians, which with the information that's being shared here and in the books that Dean has got for sale at the back, that's the ammunition they need to be able to better defend your interests. But there's no one out there offering politicians training schools. They're just folks like you. They get elected and they go to work the next week. I got a half-day session on how not to sexually harass people in the workplace, a half-day on how to fill in expense forms, very important for a politician, and that was it. That was it. That is the training that people are getting to run multi-billion-dollar departments. So increase your expectations of the politicians, but make sure that you increase your expectations of yourself as a citizen to give them the information that you think is important, because you can't expect they're going to get it from anywhere else. I think once they get it, the record across Canada has been pretty good. Yep. That we do see the conversations around foreign interference at the national level that we would never have seen a couple of years ago, because people are starting to get mad. So get angry, but most importantly, get informed and inform the decision makers so they can make better decisions on your behalf.
Great. Unfortunately, we're only going to have time for 2 more questions. So many people have questions, some who are sitting in the audience and those who are standing up and speaking. We will have index cards at the desk out front. If you want to write your question down, as Dean has said, they will be answered on the Optimum's publishing website.
Well, let me ask a question, Joan.
Yep.
Are you people willing to stay for a few more minutes and have more questions?
Okay. Great.
I think the Islanders have spoken.
Yeah, let's just take
All right.
all the questions of folks who are already.
All the questions, the 4 questions that are standing right now, we'll
Okay.
take all those questions.
Thank you.
Let's do that.
Great. 5.
Oh, 5.
Hello, my name's Randall Myers, and just to counter the first person there, I'm nor shocked or scared of any of these fellows that think they're going to overthrow us. It's all becoming very clear right across the country and around the world, the interconnection between all the different corrupt corporations and governments. My question to you is, what is the connection between the CCP and the WEF? Because you talk about interference, it's all around interference.
I'll start on that one. This is a very complex question. The answer is effectively really nothing at all. I think that that's conspiracy theory that's been perpetrated in right-wing media outlets for a long, long time. A lot of the work that the WEF and those that attend that conference every year are looking out for the best interests. Now, that's not that each country or nation has interests, and corporations have interests. No question about it. But they're not there to do some underhanded thing for anybody. So.
Why do they attend? Why do the people that we know we voted for and our heads of CEOs, why do they go if there's no power to gain or money to
Because it's a networking opportunity. Anyway, let Dominic answer.
The World Economic Forum is a Kiwanis club for rich people.
Yeah.
It is a Kiwanis club largely for rich people from Western democracies. The attacks on the World Economic Forum, which I could care less about, it is one of many international institutions that have grown up since the Second World War that are increasingly ineffective because they've lost track of some of the key needs to represent the public, which is why they get exposed to criticism. But the attacks on the World Economic Forum came from Russia. That's just a fact. You can look it up. The origins of the attacks on a lot of that you see circulated in a lot of the right-wing online communities in North America in English come directly from the dictatorships that we're sitting here complaining about. Anytime anyone tells you that there's anything wrong in Canada, look carefully about who's telling you that. Yep. And if they start to say that our economy, our corporations aren't serving us, our governments, our corporations, with all of the problems that we're talking about here today, have given us a higher standard of living than anywhere else in the history of our planet, and we should be proud of that, and we should be defending it, and we should be saying, yes, we want corporate reform, yes, we want political reform, but we are not going to stand for some crew of dictators sitting in some foreign capital spreading lies through the internet that we invented, that we have yet to figure out how to control to stop lies from being thrown back at our kids. But we're not going to take that attack on our capitalist democratic system that has given us more wealth, more equality, and more prosperity than anyone 100 years could have even dreamed about. We live like kings today compared to 150 years ago. And those folks who are representing governments where most people don't have indoor plumbing, they can get lost with their foreign propaganda stripping away our rights and our freedoms. So, sir, my message to you, don't believe Russian bullshit.
Thank you so much for this afternoon backgrounder on the CPP and the influence in this country, and I agree that we have a terrific country and we need to defend both our country and democracy. I would also like to say that I've had a personal interest in Tibetan Buddhism since I was in my early 20s, and I was very pleased when I heard Tibetan Buddhists were moving to Prince Edward Island. I've always wanted to go to Tibet. They came to me. And that was very exciting, but I'm very, very disillusioned. And the question that has not been addressed here this afternoon, and if I think I'm speaking for many, many people in this room, because we came here because we want to know who is Bliss and Wisdom and why are they here?
Who wants to take that on? I'm going to answer that. And I'm now going to put on a hat that I had to wear for 34 years. Everybody in this room wants the hope that we can do something, or that Canada can do something with an enforcement action. We would be I can tell you, is there something there? I will go so far to say yes. I will go so far to say in what I've seen, I believe there is sufficient information to launch a criminal investigation. I will say no more because I am hoping to get the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to do what I think they should do. I do know, as you know, with our disclosure laws in this country, we do not want to jeopardize the potential for a criminal investigation. So you can take my word. Is there enough that I think for an informed criminal investigation? Yes, I do. If I was sitting in my chair where I sat before, I would have no qualms about launching an investigation. I cannot, in good conscience, go into detail on that because I would jeopardize a criminal investigation.
Good afternoon, guys. Thanks so much for being here and sharing this information. It's awesome to see so many people here. I had no idea there was this many people who realized what was happening. My question is pretty simple. It's less about China and more about you guys. Who are you guys that we need to trust? Dominic just said Russian disinformation is a thing that we need to fear. Not so much you, Dean. You're a publisher. I don't really know a whole lot about you, sorry. But these guys, CSIS and RCMP, are two of the most corrupt organizations in this country. They investigate and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars investigating pastors who have church in the woods when there is corruption with China going on in this country, and that's despicable. And I literally consider Dominic Carty to be one of the top 5 worst politicians in this country. While standing on this stage telling us that China is bringing in poison, he demanded that our kids inject themselves with an untested poison just to play sports. So who are you guys? You can laugh all you want and you can say boo all you want. Who are you guys that we should trust you? I'm willing to trust you if you're honest. I guarantee you half the people in this room know me. Who are you guys and why do we trust you?
So I tell you who I am. I'm an open book. You ask me any question about my life, my background, what I spent my time doing. Since I've been a kid, I've valued the life that I have as a Canadian, able to live in freedom that most people can't dream of. And as an adult, I'll do my best to try and serve my community and serve the broader cause of democracy around the world. And I stand for science. I stand for reason. I stand for the Western tradition of Enlightenment values. And I'll stand against those, both again, as the old line goes, against enemies both foreign and domestic. Because there's a problem we've got in this country these days, that we have allowed, under the guise of free speech, we have allowed people to abuse free speech in Canada by spreading lies about our system, by spreading lies about our government, taking things that are absolutely wrong. There are absolutely problems with the RCMP and with CSIS. I'm the first to say it. I used it as an example, that I gave evidence of foreign interference to CSIS and nothing happened with it. But that's because the politicians didn't do anything with it. And that's because all of us voted for them. So that's the problem with democracy, is in the end, if we're going to be honest about it, we've got no one to blame but ourselves. And we've got the folks who want to talk about some of the issues that you raised. The problem we've got there is you guys are swallowing hook, line, and sinker conspiracies and misinformation generated by, and I love doing this stuff, I'll happily sit down for you this evening for a couple of hours and I will run through the sources of each of the pieces of misinformation that you've been repeating here today. Because what we just heard this gentleman say, he was talking about a bill that I had in New Brunswick to remove exemptions for conscience from childhood vaccinations. Kind of interesting today, without those protections, that we're seeing a resurgence in measles across the world. I wonder why that is exactly. Because what we have in the West was a vaccine system based on science, evidence, and reality that saved the lives of millions of normal people. Not the rich, not the wealthy, not the powerful, but normal people like us, like you, sir, and your kids. And we're throwing that away. And we are throwing that away because we have people operating themselves as agents of foreign interference, like this gentleman here today. And it's time we said no to China, no to Russia, and no to their fellow travelers and useful idiots here in Canada. That's what I'm here for. And I will note I will note that the gentleman who asked us who we are is not even bothering to stay to listen, because that's the way the dictatorship supporters always act.
Okay.
They can never listen.
Thank you, thank you.
Next.
Okay, last question.
We're going to the next question.
Yes.
And the last question, unfortunately.
Well, we're not here to talk about your children or anybody's children. Next question.
Okay, my name is Mike McCormick. I live down in Cardigan North. I'm a rural resident. I can't thank you enough for what you come in here. It's long overdue, and the volume of people here shows what's going on, which is awesome. And I apologize now for being off contact of what's going on, but I am also a representative of the Island Party, and my question is there any other representatives of political parties here today? If so, please stand up.
Couple. Not enough.
Okay, so I'm sorry, that was my basic question, because it's important for the people who came here to understand who's interested in what's going on. It should be more than just the people.
Shut her down.
With that, we're just going to bring Alan McPhee to say some closing words and about I Am for Democracy. So again, thank you for your engagement here today. Alan.
Thanks. Well, nothing nicer than having a room full of people sitting for 2 hours and getting to make the closing comments. I was told to shorten them up, and I said I have some things that are important to say, so that was to my organizing team. I said, well, I'll wake you up when I'm done, but I've got some things to say. As Gus Lonkovy said when he was 90 years old and got on the stage to dance at a variety concert, he said, well, we can't let the Cape Bretoners take the whole show now, can we? So it is, in full disclosure, I mean, there's a lot of stuff here in China, and I expect there will be some blowback against me possibly as an organizer of I Am for Democracy Canada. I had PNP shares. The government put the program out, my company, we took them. Nothing untoward, nothing illegal, and if that comes out, so be it, full disclosure. It's not often we get a stellar group of experts like this today, and I want to thank them all for coming here to speak to us. The compelling message that we're hearing is that democracy can slip away if we are not vigilant. And I want to address in my remarks some issues facing us and some solutions. It seems that government has lost some control and does not necessarily have the ideas, skills, or will to develop and implement effective solutions. Just because we have a functioning democracy does not guarantee that we will have a functioning democracy. And that was made clear today. And that's why we formed our organization, I Am for Democracy Canada. It's an advocacy group with the function of advancing and protecting democracy on Prince Edward Island, Canada. The objectives, aims, and purpose of our organization is in the literature we handed out. It's on our Facebook page and our website. And one of the, they're pretty standard. We're looking for transparency, the principles of good governance and accountability, and I'm not going to go into all the rest of them. One of the most interesting ones is we're making liaisons with other national organizations that are like-minded, and I have to thank Mr. Baxendale for that. He's got an impressive contact list, and we hope to have some support from those people as well as we engage. Now, one of the things today is I wanted to thank Avery Haynes and W5 for coming here. She did get up at 4 o'clock this morning to get on a plane and come. And we did send a press package out to all the local media, but I don't think we were successful. And we did invite every politician, federal and provincial, on PEI. The national security of our country is compromised and our international stature is diminished. And I'm not going to go into why, but nonetheless, it's a serious problem. And there are other problems domestically. Homelessness across Canada and PEI is at a record level. The disastrous experiment with safe supply of drugs has led to 40,000 deaths since 2016. We lost 50,000 people in the Second World War. This is a war against our young people. Sorry. And as the death count continues to grow, it is unacceptable for this to be taking place in our country. Our way of life is changing, and the threats are real. They're a real danger to losing our way of life and possibly our country. We cannot let that happen. Our forefathers would be ashamed if we lost our democracy, and what would we have to say to our children if we don't have a democracy to pass on to them? What is clear is that it's no longer okay for citizens to fully trust or rely on government to deliver peace and good governance. It's not enough to be constant critics. Another Surrey story, there was a philosopher called Joey Sale. He had 10 kids, and he was a good friend of mine, and we worked to keep dialysis across PEI when they were trying to close it down in rural areas. And I encountered somebody in government, and they were I'm not very satisfied with them. So I went on at length to Joey about how bad they were and how unhappy I was about it. And he said, Alan, he listened to me for quite a while, and he said, Alan, you got to think of it this way. If they weren't such an arsehole, you probably wouldn't look so good yourself. So it's not good enough just to be a constant critic. Engaged and organized citizens can make an impact, as we're showing here today, and I would encourage you to send a note to the press, to the editors, to the Guardian, to the CBC, and say, hey, the front page of the Guardian this morning was a new dog license law. Look at this room. Look at the people who've come here. Look at the issues we're talking about. And the front page of the paper is a dog license line. And CBC didn't show up. So please, contact their editorial desks and tell them you want real news. We must speak truth to power, and we must bring truth to power, and that means we have to name names regardless of the political party. We must also be apolitical. That doesn't mean we don't need people from any party. Apolitical means we need people from every party so they can influence politicians and the parties they support. And I'm going to name a few names this afternoon. As an organization, we want to be helpful and constructive. Peace, order, and good government is the constitutional motto of Canada, which we believe in, as well as highest ethical standard. And there's three areas I want to touch on briefly. First is individual rights. We need to have a public health care system that works well for all of the time, yet health care is falling apart. Something is obviously wrong when 6.5 million Canadians, that's 1 in 5, including 35,000 Islanders, are without a primary physician. That means Canadian Universal Medicare is dead, and we plan to address health care at a future event, particularly from a legal perspective, with the help of some of the national organizations. Also, government voted in favor of legalizing all drugs in British Columbia and had a motion for legalizing street drugs across Canada. That motion failed in the Commons, though it's still officially part of the Liberal federal platform that was passed in Halifax. PEI's own MP, Leith MacDonald, voted for all the legalization of all drugs in our country. And our message is fight the criminal drug business and get addicts proper help. Do not bring hard drugs to the people in the streets of Prince Edward Island. I publicly challenge Leith MacDonald to call a public meeting and make the case for legalization of all drugs. To vote in such a manner and not bring it to a discussion in a public forum is cowardly and needs to do better. Under the Charter of Rights in Canada, our rights are not inalienable. They are only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law, according to the Charter. And that's a major danger point in our governance. So currently, how is reasonable determined is a big issue. Currently, Bill C-63 And I'm just going through a few issues that we're going to be addressing with their association. So I'm going to just kind of machine gun them here, but you'll understand the point of what I'm trying to do is tell you what's upcoming. Bill 63 is an overreach in free speech being introduced by the Trudeau government. The National Post says it's a full frontal assault on free speech. The Wall Street Journal says Canada considers legislation to allow house arrest for prospective offenses not yet committed. And the Canadian Civil Liberties Association says Bill C-63 undermines the fundamental principle of democratic accountability. Our next event will be about Bill C-63, and we will strongly request that PEI's senior parliamentarian, the Honourable Lawrence Macaulay, attend and answer to the people about why his government is putting this forward. And if he doesn't want to come and face the people, well, we'll note that. So historically, we've had a lot of citizen participation in PEI through various community boards, and that provincially has been eliminated and replaced by a centralized and failing high-cost bureaucracy. We're getting more money, paying more money for poor results. Healthcare, which used to have competent community boards, now spends over $1 billion annually, and PEI is rated the worst access in Canada. It's not working. In education, local school boards were closed, and now parental contributions to curriculum are uninvited, and there's intrusion by the state on the legal duty of care for a parent over the rights of a child. Even in the Department of Energy, their projects, which were answerable to municipalities or citizens' interests, now has the authority, or they say they have the authority, to do what they want, any project, anywhere, anytime. It's complete authoritarianism in its perfect conditions for corruption. The Premier has not answered several requests to publicly debate the growing authoritarianism in his government, but we'll keep at it. And the trend against citizen participation being eliminated from our governing institutions is a danger to democracy and must be reversed. Thirdly and finally, information is the bedrock of our democracy. And the lack of transparency in many areas is a real threat to Prince Edward Island. Difficulty in freedom of information requests, the mistreatment of whistleblowers, loans are made by the government and you can't find out who, tens of millions of dollars are written off by the government and they won't disclose who they're writing the money off to. Shareholder names are not visible. The amount of money, and again we're going into the tens of millions of dollars, the amount of money that's paid to law firms and the rates that are paid to lawyers is not disclosed. The whole legal system in PEI is compromised by this. There is no repercussion for corruption in Prince Edward Island, there is only reward. And these issues are fertile ground for rampant corruption, and they must stop with simple transparency. So I would like to right a wrong today by acknowledging some people, a little controversial, but they were publicly mistreated for shining a light on corruption. Susan Oliver Holmes is here. Cora Nicholson is here. Give a wave. They were whistleblower champions of PMP and absolutely mistreated by Spencer Campbell in his role as the Liberal Party president. The notorious Rob McCachran may be here with the notorious Red Like Me, but he blew the lid off the PNP scandal. Paul Maines, who continues to fight through the corruption of information transparency in the e-gaming scandal. And David Weale, who shines the light on many issues of the island he loves so dearly. So I thank you for your public duty to obtain transparency and lawfulness in our democracy. In conclusion, we hope you found value in sharing your day with us today. And I want to thank Grace Cameron, my friend and neighbor, for that question. I thought it was a great question, Grace. You know, is everybody corrupt? Great question. And no, they're not. We encourage you to sign up with our organization to get information on future events, and information we'll be sending out. And we ask you to join the effort we will make to educate, advocate, and litigate our way towards a responsible, accountable, and transparent government in Canada. A special thank you to those unnamed supporters who, without their efforts, this effort would not have happened. You know who you are. Many thanks. And once again, thank you to our outstanding guests, Dean Baxendale, Michel Juneau-Katsuya, who, by the way, is a terrific cook, so if the spy thing doesn't work out, he can open a restaurant on PEI. Garry, Clement, Dominic Carty, and David Weale. The guests will be around. Thank you, yes. The guests will be around to chat for about 30 minutes, and Godspeed to you, one and all. Thank you.
Thank you. So just very quickly in closing, I want to say thank you for everybody who came here today. You sent a clear message to the politicians and to the media here today. So thank you for coming out. The gentleman who asked the question, who are we? We're islanders just like you. We're people who give a damn. And that's all you need to know. And thank you very much for all coming here today.